Hi Emmanuel, it's James at Reedish Motorsport. Just doing the walk around video for your M3 after we've carried out our comprehensive vehicle inspection. This is just before we take the car apart, just to identify any issues that might come into or might give us an issue during our process, or anything that you need to be aware of just in case you'd like us to help you out or give you any prices on those sort of things whilst you've got chance and opportunity. As you know, the rear end's going to be completely stripped, so there's advantageous labour times for bushes and things like that. However, we do understand that you are doing a lot of the refreshing yourself later on when you get the car back, so a lot of these things probably you won't need to worry about in this instance, but I'll just go through them anyway, as we always do with everybody, so you've got a true picture of the condition of the car. So the front xenon drop link level sensor is broken and is up there. So headlight potentiometer is not working. Both front brake disc backing plates are loose and might be rattling for you. Both steering tie rods are seized at the wheel alignment threaded adjustments, which is quite a common thing on most vehicles nowadays. Both brake flexi hoses for the front have been changed for performance braided hoses, which are fine, but they're missing a protective shroud. They should have a grommet going through that IVA bracket, and that one's routed around the back, which is likely to chafe in the future. There's signs of an old, or actually it could be current, signs of a very small coolant leak from the lower radiator hose. There's a white coolant stainage up here and a little bit of moisture just up here, and directly above my finger there's a plastic boss where the coolant outlet temperature sensor lives, and those are notorious for plastic hardening and allowing water to escape. Power steering system, the high pressure hose is starting to leak, and that goes from the power steering pump over to the power steering rack. The engine constant pressure valve, which is at the rear of the engine block, is just starting to leak, and there's a very small oil trail coming down the engine block and the front of the gearbox edge. Not yet got to the bottom of the engine, but there's a small trace of oil which is coming from the constant pressure valve. The lower radiator fan cowling Torx fittings are missing on both sides of the radiator. The air conditioning drive belt is cracked. The prop shaft rubber coupling is okay, but it's just starting to show signs of age. I wouldn't really worry about this at the moment, but they do get cracks in them from time to time, and there's some small hairline cracks developing just now, where my finger is. Signs of accident damage on the left rear, which we know about that. We talked when you came in. It's had a quarter panel. We can see that from in the boot, and we can see there's some corrosion where the quarter panel joins across the seal. There's some non-genuine seam sealer all the way to the front seal section, and there's a dent in the floor just here, and you can also tell that by it's got some non-genuine seam sealer finish on the inside of the wheel arch lip, and some corrosion that you wouldn't normally associate with a 2006 vehicle. Rear trailing arm bushes are showing signs of age, just where the rubber is starting to unbond from the aluminium shell of the bush because the aluminium's oxidizing. I think that bush is either drifted or been installed slightly off centre, because there's more of the bush poking out on the right hand side than there is on the left. Again, I know you've asked us not to do a wheel alignment, so what we will do is, and you just want it available to drive 70 miles because you're going to be stripping it yourself, so for the record we'll just be scribing those bolt locations, the bolt heads on the rear trailing arm pocket, and then putting it back into that position, so then as requested then we won't be doing a wheel alignment for you. Next on the list is metal brake pipes at the rear of the car. They've got corrosion on them. We can't see the flexi unions yet until you take the wheels and the springs out, but those are also likely to be corroded. But thankfully you've supplied front to rear brake pipes and the over axle brake pipe, so we'll be shaping those to original locations and fitting them for you whilst we've got good access with the axle and the tank out of the car. Anti-roll bar drop links at the rear, the bushes are starting to crack. Rear subframe bushes are also starting to crack. I've taken the washer off of this bush so we can see the join of where the rubber is bonded to the aluminium shell, centre shell, and there's a good crack all the way around there, separation crack. Rear xenon drop link system appears to be seized. That plastic push rod should be straight and vertical, but the corrosion on those balls inside the plastic sockets have probably corroded and expanded and grabbed tightly to the plastic, so a new drop link can clean the corrosion off, I'd recommend, when you strip your axle down for the refresh. Offside rear exhaust silencer rubber is broken. It's got the aftermarket back box on there, which might be stressing this rubber because it's stressed backwards, and from memory they normally go stressed forwards, but let's see if I can give you a indication. But there's a crack or a breakage in the rubber in the middle around where the stud going through it is. I wanted to see it from that side a bit clearer. Yeah, just there. On the rear differential, there's a very slight weep of oil from the output seals. A little bit of an oil moisture over the casing entirely, and these little silver white spots are salt. There's very small reflection of oil just there on that right output seal, and hardly anything, but you can see a little reflection there. I'd suggest that moisture's been collecting for so long, but so small because there's no drips at all, but the dirt has just been sticking to the oil residue on the diff. What that does mean is it means it's going to be very clean underneath there, I'd imagine, not too corroded, so when you do degrease this diff, it should be quite fresh underneath. Exhaust centre section, there's a heat shield on the left of it to stop the heat soak going into the drive shaft CV joint rubber, and the system works with 4 studs that are welded to the exhaust at factory and then held on with nuts, and due to vibration the studs break because this one is just lifting, and it's very tight but it could introduce a vibration, so welding new studs onto that location and putting the plate back on would be a sensible thing to do. The suspension coil springs are mismatched. The front has got eye-back and the rears have got an unknown brand. We can't find a name on these ones, just to let you know they're different front to rear. The V-brace at the rear axle has incorrect fixings. It looks quite fresh. It might have been yourself that's put this in, so we're not saying that it's a bad thing. It's just it's not quite the original one. They should have a hex with a 16mm head, just if we want to make it look factory original. The right rear lower ball joint is knocking, so it's got an excessive play here, which we know about. There's a knocking noise when somebody moves the wheel, and I'm in checking all the joints. I can feel that it's from this lower ball joint here on the camber arm, but you've told me you've got eye-back camber arms to go on, so I'd suggest doing the ball joint whilst you're doing your eye-back camber arms as well. Rear trailing arm is missing some cable clips, some special little Christmas tree clips we call them, like these ones here, just to hold the ABS and the brake pad wiring sensors. And it's also missing the correct, it's got its spring clip there, but it doesn't seem to be doing much because the Goodrich hoses have got an incorrect fitting in there, so it's had to be cable tied instead. I think that's the same on both sides. The left rear fuel tank under tray is missing a fixing up in the distance. There's also quite a lot of corrosion on the brackets, I should say, whilst we're under here, especially on this right rear, on that fuel tank strap bracket, and some of the fixings in the bolts and the brake pipe bracket. And we talked about this one. This is the battery tray bracket. We'll give you some prices for those. And I think the last thing underneath is the aquaplane guards, which are here to direct the water flow away from the tyres, and fitted slightly incorrectly. They need to go in between the side skirt and this under tray. That's the same on both sides, and they're loose because there's a fitting missing at the top on that one and a fitting missing at the top on that one, plus there, and that long grey rivet hasn't got the centre stud in it. So that finishes the inspection underneath the car, and now there's just 2 more things inside or in the engine bay which I'll add to the video and show you. And the last things to mention are up in the engine bay, we've got the ignition coil earth strap, which comes out of this lead here, which where this supplies the ignition coils with pulse and earth. And the ignition, the earth lead should be bolted to the engine block, which it is technically, but the bolt is loose, so the earth lead is also loose and the bolt is loose as well. So we'll tighten that up for you, and just to let you know, that's how we found it. And then also the last thing is the positive, this is the B plus jump-in terminal for the engine bay. It's missing its securing cover, so that is hot at all times and live, so if you or anybody put a tool on there or anything, that would be quite a risk of touching an earth point. So I suggest getting a cover from your parts department to cover that back up. And finally, we're just talking about the possible hairline cracks or spot weld failures inside the car underneath the cavity of the boot panel and the rear seat panel. You can confirm that through borescope camera checking that the rear cavity appears fine. There don't seem to be any spot weld failures that we usually find in cars, so that's great, excellent, no problem. We don't need to go into the rear to do anything here. But then going into the car the other way, thanks for removing the interior as well, it's very handy, helpful. You've already done your bracket removal and the 20mm grommet holes to drill, which is great, and we can see small little defects in the MIG welds. They are very hard to work out, but there looks to be a little crack around that MIG weld in the distance. Very hard to work out, but this one's a little bit clearer to work out. Just try and focus in the middle of that MIG weld. There is definitely a crack going through that MIG weld there. That sort of brown black line is a crack going through it. So the fronts are going to need to be cut open. This is what we call the front two mounts for the rear subframe. So we need to take a bit of sound deadening out here. It is nicer to take the entire sound deadening pad off, but it's quite excessive just for the front mounts because we only really need that section off there. And I know you talked about you're going to be doing a welding cage in the future, so I think it'd be sensible for us not to replace the entire sound deadening pad, because it'll only be ripped up or messed up later in the year or next year when you do your welding cage. So we'll just take off a local section of sound deadening pad there and there. We'll keep them and put them back on. And then we'll cut an access door just here in the seat panel, stop drill the ends of those cracks, remove them with a belt sander, and then replace them with far thicker, better penetrating MIG welds to connect the threaded receivers to the cavity cover panel inside there. And then we'll put our Reedish V2 005 plates, which are cover plates, back on, which have got a small fold just here to take the contour of the floor nicely. They get spot welded on in about 6 to 8 places. That'll be both sides, and there'll be a hole in the middle so that you can always inspect them with a borescope camera or wax them in the future if you need to, and that will effectively repair the inside. So all we need to do on the inside, as far as I can see at the moment, is just these front couple of mounts here, so that's good news.